Welcome to the London Commercial Offices podcast with me, your host, Steve Berridge, Managing Director at Fidgens Cost Management. This is a podcast where we share the stories, career paths, lessons and insights from some of the industry's most influential people. Anything contained within our podcast should not be considered professional advice, and if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe or follow buttons to ensure you don't miss any of the amazing guests we've got coming up. It also really helps us grow the show. Thanks. Today we're joined by Steve Gilchrist, owner and director at Propetual, a consultancy business focused on helping stakeholders across the industry be more efficient with their resources. Steve has over 20 years experience in the industry with a background spanning civil engineering at SRM, project management at Arup and client-side roles at Grosvenor Estates. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be here.
Really excited to dip into your career and unpick your views on the market, particularly around Propetual and your circular steel movement. But before we get into that, could we just take a sort of a step back and have a chat about how you originally got involved in real estate many moons ago?
Sure. So, back in the day, I came out of Loughborough Uni and was originally, while I was there, was in the Midlands region. But for me, what I quickly learned working as a contractor in that region was there was more work in London, and so there was a pull there to go and basically explore some a better variety of projects in my mind with McAlpines who were sort of sponsoring me at uni. So I came down to London in 2008 and instantly on some bigger, more interesting office projects. And I was there for 5 years across 3 different projects.
And that was as an engineer?
Yes, as an engineer, yeah. I did civil engineering at Loughborough. And, an engineer on site is doing engineering stuff, but also package management, section management, and really, you're there day-to-day problem solving and troubleshooting, making sure that the job is getting built as per the design and specification. So I really enjoyed that. It was a great experience. You see how things are put together or shouldn't be put together at times. And, I also in that period actually did a little bit of structural design work on a placement because I was keen to get chartered. I was one of those younger people in the business that had the drive and motivation to get chartered status, which at that time there was a lot of people in the industry that didn't really have that. And so, I wanted to kind of differentiate myself. And so I did that. Following on from getting chartership, I decided now's time for a change. So I became chartered and then made the switch to project management. And
how long after did you get your chartered before you jumped?
Not very long.
And did was it SRM? Were they sponsoring you to get that chartership? I mean, it happens quite a lot.
No, not such. They were a sponsor while I was at university. There's a really good scheme, actually. I don't know if it still exists between kind of Loughborough and many different contractors, consultants, and in the industry, and it really does a good job of matching people to potential employers. So that relationship kind of just carried on in terms of employment whilst I was in London. But no, they weren't sort of sponsoring me through that chartership as such.
And what
just
time
one of those
frame?
Things.
Sorry, what time frame were you at Loughborough? What was the
2003 to 2008? So
I
was always on a master's. Yeah,
right. Loughborough was my first choice at uni. I remember way back when, and I had the same thing because I was studying quantity surveying, and I had to pick a contractor to partner with for my degree. So I think I got a place with Walter Lilly back in the day, but at the last knockings changed my mind and thought the PQS route was more my style for whatever reason, and ended up at Bristol. But I did have a look around Loughborough. Great uni.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah,
it would have been a good one.
It always makes me laugh when I think back as the kind of the naivety of what you know, or really what you don't know when you're in that position. Because it was a first year at uni, and we're there sort of picking our first choices from this little meet and greet that we did. Whether it was McAlpines or Lang O'Rourke or I don't know Atkins or WSP or whoever it was, but at that point barely even really understood what the difference between a contractor or a consultant was, and you didn't realise that was sort of picking a career path, even though nothing's ever fixed forever, but it certainly put me on a path. And so I'd done a little bit of structural design experience whilst at McAlpine, and I knew some of that kind of knowledge and wanting to see projects from a slightly different perspective, bearing in mind when you're as a contractor, often you just see the build phase and you don't even really have much appreciation for what's happening before or after. Yeah, I kind of went into project management with Arup and got to see things from a slightly wider spectrum, in terms of the project life cycle.
And did you know someone at Arup at the time that you reached out to, or was it a recruiter that sort of showed you the light and tried to drag you across?
Well, never send me on a secondment. That's the rule,
right.
With me, because I'd been on that structures placement, and that was with Arup. So I used some sort of contacts, and they basically knew I was all right, got half a brain, and would be a good person to have on board. So that helped me in terms of making that move.
Excellent. So left SRM, or got qualified, left SRM, jumped over to Arup as a sort of associate project manager or junior project manager. Where did you jump in the pecking order?
I think I went in as a project manager.
And was that straight on to a live job?
Well, funnily enough, the kind of experience I got in that first year or 18 months, I suppose, was not so much live jobs, in and around the things that I'd done already, as a contractor, but just seeing it from a slightly different angle. I was actually doing, project management for Arup. There spanned some other types of projects as well. So I was actually looking at kind of a bit more master planning in Croydon, and we were trying to map out all of the different works in coming years. And there's a whole piece of work we did there. The closest thing to sort of being on site again was working on the Francis Crick. So I did sort of part-time role there, which was a bit of an eye-opener, because that was this huge project where the science has sort of moved on, and it was big and on-site, and but some of the labs, many labs, I can't remember how many labs, but there was like 60 labs that I was looking after that were already, some of them designed, they're all designed, some of them were partially built on site, partially fitted out, but the science was changing, and so the brief was being adapted, and these rooms were going to be used for different things. So I had a pretty tricky job of trying to understand where each one was and how it was going to need to be adapted, and the design change. So that was kind of a taste of a different step outside of, what, when you're a contractor, you just build what you're told, where here I was trying to work out where things were. And so, yeah, it was good. And I actually got sent over to Abu Dhabi for what was a few weeks and became 6 months to help on the midfield terminal building. So that was, again, another taste of kind of design coordination. So it was actually client side with only one or two other people there, but trying to manage a design team that was sort of spread across the world, some in Dubai, some in Abu Dhabi on site, some in America, some in London, for kind of tunnel structural design. So, I think anyone would say if you work at Arup, you get a good variety of projects because of the sort of breadth of what they can do, and geographically, and as well as different kind of industries and sectors. And I certainly saw that in 18 months. And then guess what happened after that?
How long you were there for? 18 months?
I was there for about 2 years, but after 18 months, I was sent on secondment.
Right, this is where the story begins.
Yeah, part 2 of the secondment saga. Yeah, so I went full time into Grosvenor. We sort of secured a project management framework for Grosvenor Estates, and it was me and a couple of others that were there full time to play a project management role for Grosvenor. So that was what I was doing from 2015, middle of 2015. That was back on projects as I was talking about them, the kind of projects that McAlpine were on. In fact, that was one of the selling points with me and Arup into Grosvenor, was that I knew McAlpine because McAlpine were doing a lot of the Grosvenor jobs. I went straight onto a project where it was McAlpine on site, and I'd got those, some of that knowledge and experience of doing that, but I was now running the project from a different perspective.
Do you remember what that project was?
33 Grosvenor Street. Yeah, it was a listed townhouse on Grosvenor Street with some residential units at the back, and it was maybe 5 months from practical completion, that one. So I got involved and was told by if Charlie Horn from British Land is listening, then he's told me it ain't broke, don't break it. And I think I passed that test and managed to.
That's fine. I'll put that in the podcast notes and tag it.
Tag him. So that was kind of the first project for Grosvenor. I was working on a couple of other things alongside, which it's good to have these different experiences. I was working on projects where something was near completion, and other things that were early days, trying to work out the brief and think about, forming design teams and stuff. So again, like the stuff that you haven't done as a contractor, and I'd, done some of, but limited when I was at Arup. So that kind of career progression wasn't really planned. It was just kind of natural evolution, and realizing that there's desire for being involved in sort of strategy and decision making.
And do you think, from your perspective, you landed at Grosvenor and you realised that was the kind of work that you wanted to do? You enjoyed running projects, or was there aspects that you missed previously from what you were doing at Arup or were doing at SRM?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think it's kind of both. They're definitely like the being in control and shaping the project. There's what I realise is, I was precious about a project. I remember being at McAlpine, and office agents would come around and I'd be like, get off of my site, you're in the way, we're trying to finish this job. And then you realise when you're at Grosvenor working as a client that they are just another part of a very important team that is going to overall be involved in the success of the project. So I was kind of a little bit humbled by that, and seeing how things work from a different angle. But no, I like the control and the kind of curating of the wider team and that side of things. But there's still something that you can't replace in terms of like being on site and the teamwork that goes into being a contractor, and with the subcontractors, the supply chain, and just pulling all of that together. There's always something that goes wrong. Contractor A doesn't turn up on site, you then have to rearrange contractor to B, or something goes wrong, and that's just day in, day out as in the life of a contractor.
Completely different set of challenges.
Yeah.
So dropped into Grosvenor, a secondee. I assume it went well. How long were you working on those live projects for as a secondee?
Well, I definitely found a taste for client side, because it was only by basically December that year that I decided I wanted to kind of make a jump from Arup and on the consultancy side, where I was playing in a secondee role on the client side, and make that jump. And I won't go into all the details, but I was actually going to go somewhere else that kind of prompted and enabled a conversation with Grosvenor. So being as you're already doing the actual role, then it's kind of a no risk move to say you switch employer and do that under permanent employment. So that's what I did. And from February 2016, that was when I was effectively doing the same thing, but just not having to manage two sets of emails and two sets of sort of corporate stuff.
Excellent. And then in terms of moving and trying to bring that more towards present day, so you then stayed at Grosvenor for how long?
8 years, pretty much.
Oh, so quite a while.
Yeah. It's Grosvenor, that evolution of career and understanding. I then realised there's this whole kind of property side of the industry, which you think of projects, but then you realise that projects are just part of a kind of property cycle. And so I've never been sort of taught about leases and all of this side of stuff if you did that sort of degree, but you certainly learn on the job and quickly get an appreciation and gradually improve that understanding. So those 8 years have been very valuable to me in terms of just helping kind of bolster that understanding and expanding it, frankly, to better understand why some of these projects are happening, maybe why some of them aren't as well, because they don't all get through the sort of business case and the approvals. Yeah, and through that 8 years, I kind of went from being a project manager that was the project manager for a project. We switched models after a couple of years where I then was managing project managers, so you're a bit more sort of step back. So these might be external project managers. And then I also took on more and larger projects through that period as well. So come the end of my stint at Grosvenor, I was sort of running the delivery of our largest project, South Mountain Triangle in Mayfair, which is a kind of
for those that don't know that, what was the project?
So contract value somewhere north of, if you include sort of enabling and all of that stuff as well, probably north of 200 million. It's directly opposite Claridge's on Brook Street, and it kind of includes 2 blocks. It's like a wedding cake design where it's kind of fitting in with the heritage landscape and the views to keep all those things protected. effectively not seen from the ground, even though we're adding more floors and basically kind of combining a whole suite of buildings that were frankly very old, very inefficient, and needed so much work that we looked at kind of more of a refurb option there, and it didn't stack up. You're trying so hard to kind of make something operate efficiently, and so we kept facades. We've taken down facades to rebuild them, and but ultimately get much better floor space back, and we have better deliveries and servicing and this sort of stuff through a combined basement, and it's a wider placemaking kind of scheme as well. So it's doing a lot, and it sits, one of the buildings is above the Crossrail station, so that proves a bit challenging with some of the sort of engineering and foundation works as well.
So in as a secondee, hop over the fence as a project manager, spend 8 years at Grosvenor, rising through the ranks to working on one of their larger schemes. In terms of trying to drag this forward into sort of where you are now and what excites you and your new venture, Propetual, we obviously talked about it's essentially a consultancy to help others in the industry be more efficient with their resources. Have you always been, I'm going to say, excited by that thesis topic, or is that something that you've developed, grown over your, is it 8 years with Grosvenor? Was that there before you started with Grosvenor? Can you just talk to me about sort of where that came about and why it gets you excited?
I think there's always been something that's been there, perhaps not as sort of strong and at the fore as it is now. The kind of the last 2 years, perhaps, is at Grosvenor where that grew and became something, rather than just saying, sustainability and being efficient, eco-friendly, and all this sort of stuff is important to me. Yeah, I kind of ended up in a material reuse sort of working group within Grosvenor, and it's one of those things where, easy to say now, but if you ever get a chance to sort of do a few of these little things, whether it's within your business or externally, then try and make the time and do it. I was sort of reluctant, and it just sort of happened because there was nobody else there to do it, and it needed somebody. But then I actually kind of lent into that and gave it probably more time than people were expecting, and made the time for it in and amongst the project work. And that was, that kind of snowballed and was encouraged by the business because it was good stuff that was hitting all the right notes, and we were partnering with different consultants and designers and people in the industry to try and all put something in and get something new and learning out of it. And so that probably in 2021, something like that, was, I think, the start of it really. And then I've just built upon that in terms of carrying on talking about this stuff, running a steel event, Circular Steel, that I did for the last couple of years, sort of in my spare time, even though I was still in employment. But I just kind of had this view that I was involved in these conversations with different people in the industry, and often talking about the same stuff with different people. So I thought I could actually bring everyone together. And so that kind of naturally happened, really. Once I'd said, I think I could do this, and you've started to put a date down, so suddenly you're beyond the point of no return.
So what was that date when you left Grosvenor?
Leaving Grosvenor was earlier this year, January. But that event, the Circular Steel event, was 2022 in June, and the same again last year in 23. So I was kind of bringing those people together and realising that there was something there.
So for those that don't know, in terms of the Circular Steel,
yes,
I'm going to call it movement, if that's the right term. Just give a quick sort of snapshot as to sort of what it is. I mean, I think I have a good understanding of it, but I think some of our listeners, it might be a new term to them.
Yeah, it's something pretty simple, really. It's reusing structural steel in its kind of current form. So if you think when you demolish a building, you take out steel members, columns, beams, etc. Typically, those are cut up and sent away as scrap steel. Now, that doesn't generally go to landfill because it's high value. The demo contractors can get some value from that. So it typically would go to a sort of arc furnace and be melted down and put back into new steel that's got a lower carbon. But this is about reusing steel in its kind of truest sense, because you're taking out beams and columns in their sort of whole, and then doing testing, a little bit of work on them, but then ultimately you reuse them as they were in a new design, new structure. And so there's quite a lot to it. It's not straightforward, but then again, when you compare it to some other materials, steel is quite easy to understand. If it's not been corroded and you can test it for its grade, then it comes in standard section sizes, and it makes it actually relatively easy to do, and people can get on board with that. What we will maybe talk about later is where, what other materials, or why is it not happening with other materials, or where could it happen with other materials. But steel has been one of those ones where I seem to find myself at the front of a conversation, and also steel is at the kind of front of the material reuse in the wider circular economy.
And who are you finding driving those conversations? Is that clients, operators, or is that developers, or is that more design team led, trying to promote the reuse angle of steel?
It's actually come from all of the above, really. I think structural engineers were pretty close to that bleeding edge of seeing the potential, realizing they could sort of design with it if they had the right specifications and testing. And so we're perhaps trying to bring clients along for the ride and persuade architects that different size beams and things could be made to work. But they were, I'm talking about London, and so this is like everything that happens in London happens elsewhere. London is like in my mind, the Formula One of construction projects. We're going to do the sort of ambitious, innovative things first. And so in the biggest and the most ambitious projects, those were the kind of conversations being had. I think it's shifted a little bit now. It's kind of like as a ripple effect, it's moved outwards, and also now clients are kind of asking and expecting reuse steel. And you even see, I think, sort of local authorities asking questions around that if they think that if there's a building coming down, or they're asking about how much material has been reused and things. So they know about steel reuse now, and therefore it's a question that comes up.
So in terms of the circular steel events are held, are they once a year?
Yes, let's say yes, because I've been thinking about the one that could happen in 2024. I think I've not quite got everything together for June, which is typically when it happened the last 2 years. But hopefully I'll be sharing some details and ideas around something for circular steel in September.
Perfect. And then in terms of the format for that, so is that a London informal gathering of people to just share ideas? Is there structured talks and seminars? What's the kind of, what has been a typical format for the last couple of years, just in case anyone listening is interested and wants to come along?
Yeah. So we've, for the last couple of years, run. It's only been me organising it, so I've kept it manageable. But had in 2023 we had 5 different kind of sessions within a day. So it was a full day kind of ticket. And we had 4 different sort of sessions where there was a panel speakers, and they were focused on different topics. So one of them was particularly in depth around the sort of specifications. Another one, we were actually looking at the other side of the kind of circular equation, which is, well, if you're trying to reuse material and steel, then are you taking it away from the arc furnaces, and how does the sort of wider ecosystem of steel balance out? So Will from the iStruct team was sort of leading that conversation. And we also had a 5th session, which was like kind of case studies from different people. And in fact, some of the case studies felt like there was half the room presenting them stood around a board, because there was a demo contractor, a client, the steel reuse guys, the structural engineer. They might all have been there and wanted to talk about what they did for that one project case study. I think going forwards, it would be a similar kind of setup. I'm thinking about whether there could be some sort of extra site visit involved one way or another, or sort of a more dedicated workshop, and maybe some things a bit more client focused and some things a bit more sort of detail designer focused, because there is quite a difference in terms of somebody who's coming in wanting to know the basics and how it can be done and what the little pitfalls are from a client's perspective, versus somebody coming to talk specifications and testing criteria and this sort of stuff.
Okay. I think, well, if anyone's listening and is interested, I think the best thing is to connect with you on LinkedIn, and then wait for that update about whether you can pull it off by June or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's circular steel. In terms of you exiting Grosvenor, you obviously had an idea in mind for your next venture. You weren't jumping from Grosvenor to nothing. And I think that next venture was Propetual, if I'm not correct. Do you want to just very quickly talk to us about your mindset about leaving Grosvenor? What was it that you were leaving Grosvenor for? I mean, Grosvenor, fantastic company, load of property. You'd risen up through the ranks, and a position where you were managing, having a direct impact on quite large scale projects. There must have been something niggling in the back of your mind that was probably missing, that you wanted to do. Could you just talk us through that, and then obviously just a summary about how you did leave, and then I suppose an introduction into what you're doing now at Propetual?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the kind of leaving Grosvenor was one of these difficult decisions because I'm on, our biggest and best project, and it was literally just getting started on site. But 8 years and another 4 years of construction on that project ahead, and I just felt that there are more things that I could now go and get involved in, across a wider range and spectrum, and I could have a wider impact than just that one project. So, when you think about, people talk about the 7-year itch and this sort of thing, I guess, there's some of that. There's also a timing factor because I decided, well, if I'm going to go, it would be nice to get the project on site. I've worked on that project for 3 years through sort of taking it from outline planning design through more detailed design and procurement. And so it's starting on site at the end of last year. It was a brilliant milestone for at least me to say I could have closed that chapter down before I left. And, as I said, there's been this sort of growing momentum behind me talking about material reuse, circular economy. And, I don't want to become just the circular economy person. I think there's a sort of passion for innovation and moving the industry forward more generally. So, I've left, and you said I didn't just leave and go into nothing. Well, it's kind of true, but not true at the same time. I've landed on my feet doing some work for a kind of startup materials exchange that's established in Europe, but coming over to the UK. And, that absolutely ticks the boxes in terms of the mantra and philosophy of what I was leaving to go and do. But I'm still a little bit in the discovery phase as to what it is that I can do to help different businesses, and some of those ideas are around products and different innovations, as I say. Some of it is more around reviewing projects, that client perspective, trying to link together some different sort of 60,000 foot perspective on how are you achieving some of the sustainability and circular economy and sort of innovation goals on a project from that client perspective, or it could be working with an architect or a structural engineer to think about it from how could they tackle the design brief differently. I'm really interested in whether there's more that can be done around deconstruction as well, because I think that ties in really well with the whole circular economy and material reuse piece, where buildings are generally not put together, or historically weren't put together to be taken apart. And we face that challenge regularly on demolition deconstruction projects where we're trying to take things apart and they weren't designed to. But also just the kind of technical side of it, which is you probably had more cranes available to you when you put it up. So how do you take things down? And I think that whole part of the industry will evolve and develop over the next short number of years as the pressure to sort of extract material in its highest value form increases. We'll have to get smarter in the way we sort of deconstruct. And so ultimately, what is Propetual? And it's a business of me advising and helping at the moment different businesses. I've tried to label it in the way of use less and be more efficient, because that for me can sit across all different parts of the industry, whether it's smart buildings and helping with something like that, or explain that, or introduce somebody to a smart buildings platform that's going to create value in terms of operational efficiency versus reuse and circular economy practices. Both of those things can still sit under and true to that kind of overall mantra.
I think it's a really useful and I think interesting resource. I think a lot of the big corporates perhaps do have this in-house expertise, but I imagine there's a huge amount of stakeholders out there that know a little about it but want to know more, but don't necessarily know where and how to access that information, or don't want to ask potentially stupid questions in a meeting, when in reality lots of other people have got the same questions to ask. They're all just sitting on their hands. So I think it's, if you're there to offer, steer, guide, that can only be a good thing, I think, in terms of the wider conversation.
There's a big network that is established over a number of years, and I'm not necessarily going to be able to solve every problem, but actually sometimes you hear a question and you think, there's somebody else that knows. And so being able to help and connect the dots is often all that is needed, actually.
Absolutely. You mentioned, just going back a few minutes, you did mention the material reuse exchange. which I am keen to touch on. So we can jump over to that now. Just for our listeners, do you want to just give a very brief overview of what it is? And then we can kind of jump into more of how you got involved helping them and perhaps what you're doing for them and where you see that going. That would be great.
Mm-hmm. So the business that I'm doing some work for and supporting is excessmaterialsexchange.com. So that is a Dutch business that is already established and operating over in sort of Northern Europe. And they've actually, if anyone thinks, oh, hang on, I've heard of that already, it's probably because they've heard of it being used at Enfield Council. And so that, I suppose you could call it a trial or a sort of closed system that they were using it on just at Enfield, because Meridian Water Enfield projects were of enough size that they thought there was materials that were going to kind of flow through that platform and become available that could be taken by others. But ultimately, there's an update of the platform. There's a launch. By the time this goes out, the launch will have probably happened. I think if people are interested and want to get involved, then reach out to me or EME and Excess Materials Exchange and see if we can help. Fundamentally, what this is doing, it's trying to provide and extract value from what otherwise might be considered waste or low value material. So one of the challenges there is labeling and categorizing it correctly, getting it onto an inventory, and then sort of turning that inventory around and presenting it as a marketplace. And so the history of these is that they're all nice ideas, but has there been enough momentum behind that and kind of critical mass for these things to actually take off? Because it's a network effect. The more materials and products and things that are on these platforms, the more people will see the benefit in using them. And so actually, I really believe that this year is kind of the year where I think we'll hit that shift in gears and see that there's you go from talking about these things and oh yeah, nice idea, but not really working, or I've sort of dabbled or I've looked, but there wasn't anything there. I think that this year is where the focus on circular economy, focus on material reuse, some of the technology and services that are now available are all coming together to mean that there will be a shift in kind of the way people think about these things, as going from a nice idea to something that they want to be part of, and then pretty soon that they probably can't be without.
So for context, this is back to your circular steel movement in the sense of, okay, so we do have some steel that we've taken out of a building. It can essentially be tested, graded, added to the inventory, and it then becomes available on the material reuse exchange. So other people that might be starting a project in the early design stages can see, okay, well, look, we need some steel. They can look at that material exchange and they can see if there's anything useful that they can extract from that. That's the nuts and bolts of it.
That's the principle, yeah. And there's all sorts of nuance and detail around, how and when these things are placed on a platform, who's tested it, what's the level of information. If we just use steel as an example, there's all sorts of testing criteria. But then if you've got all of that, you really know what you're dealing with. If you think of a pallet of bricks, then there's probably less information available, but depending on your use of those bricks, you may or may not need any more information. And so there's quite a lot of thought going into kind of the way you categorize and capture information on materials. And there's also this kind of key side of it, which is how it's going to be used. Because if you think you could spend forever getting every detail of a material and use it for some other purpose that didn't really need all that. But if you're using it for something very specialist or structural, or in a certain way that's very specific, then you probably do need that. And then there's like the whole sort of provenance of where it came from and being able to kind of validate carbon savings and things. So it's still early days, don't get me wrong, but we need people to come along and be a part of it, to show and get to that kind of critical mass, as I say, where the network effect demonstrates clearly through use that there's sufficient kind of liquidity in the market.
It's the issue. It's a two-sided marketplace, isn't it? You need buyers and sellers. You need people on both sides of the fence. Otherwise, someone comes along, can't get the value they need, and they walk away. But I think it's definitely becoming more of a conversation, and I think the circular steel stuff that you do is definitely helping that. What was the introduction to the material reuse exchange? Is that a mutual contact? Is that they reached out?
I'd known Christian, the CEO, for
You didn't do a secondment
year or
3 years,
no
4 years ago.
No. But he was actually a speaker at Circular Steel in 2023. So we already knew of each other. We were sort of, kind of, I was going to say operating, but I wasn't really operating. But talking he's operating in that space. I'm talking all about it, and there was clearly some sort of common ground there. And when I was sort of announced that I was going to be leaving Grosvenor, then it was a prime opportunity to see if I could help. And so, at the moment, helping with the launch and using a network, looking at how we can bring in more users of the platform, improve the platform, possibly look a little bit further afield as well, because this is a business that actually, interestingly, we might think of it as a construction platform, but it operates in sort of the aviation industry, the oil and gas industry, and kind of sort of heavier infrastructure as well, in terms of where it's come from, different geographies and the applications. So, one of the things that I think is an even wider opportunity is, why do we need to be so insular in thinking that construction materials have to be reused as construction materials? They could find another home in a different industry, or we could find homes for materials out of other industries. And so EME has a foundation ready to build on, because they've already sort of operate in these some of these other sectors in different geographies.
Okay, well, if anyone that is interested and wants to find out more, I will put in the show notes something for Circular Steel and a link for EME, as well as your LinkedIn profile, Steve, so they can find you and find out more. I think we're kind of drawing towards the end of our catch-up. One of the things that we like to ask all of our guests is kind of a 12-month prediction, and we're not specific in terms of about what. But I think, given that your passion and your niche in terms of circular economies and reuse, I think it would be great just to get your views on what you would like to see happen over the next 12 months, and perhaps what you expect to happen over the next 12 months. And I think what we can do then is get you back on the show next year, even if you were right, wrong, or indifferent. It's we can at least reflect on what we thought was going to happen and what has. So next 12 months.
Yeah, good question. So, what I would like to see versus what will happen. I think sticking within that circular economy, material reuse space, and maybe wider sort of, sustainability, there's definitely going to be, and already is, I think, a kind of a shift towards circular economy as the next thing that is a solution to lowering carbon, and perhaps getting through planning permissions or complying with planning permissions and the stringent carbon numbers that are involved in that. So I think that's a kind of no-brainer. It's already happening, and that narrative this year and that kind of desire and having to do those things is only going to get stronger. I think last year, when I was talking particularly in sort of steel terms, I said that last year was the year of the tool, because all the designers seem to be building little algorithms and tools that could take a steel section inventory and match it with a kind of Revit model. And there's a lot of people going, "Oh, we've built this tool. And
are they in the market now? Those tools?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's what's the one that comes to mind? HTS Steel's their stock matcher. I think WSP did one. Yeah, there's a whole range of different people, and whether they were building them in-house use or to make them more widely available. But last year was the year of the tool. I feel like this year is, I'm not just talking about steel here, but this year in maybe the circular economy space, it feels like building momentum around the materials exchanges. So I think EME and others are in prime position to try and take advantage of that interest, and that's a two-way street. We need the interest, and the interest needs platforms and services that make it happen. But I feel like that's coupled with the sort of deconstruction and the efforts to salvage material is kind of what's happening this year. What do I think won't happen, or I would like to happen? I would like to see more on the sort of deconstruction, but I still think that there's more to be done in that space. I wrote a piece on the newsletter the other week about integration, and I just feel at the moment that there's technology and different services and startups and things out there, but putting myself back in that sort of set of client shoes, it's a real struggle sometimes when There's, something to do with O&Ms, something to do with, capturing on-site data and images, something to do with the digital sort of twin or the asset model. Then you've got, somebody saying we can take material out of a building, we'll put it on this platform. And how do all these different things fit together? And how does it come to some sort of offer that integrates so that when you finish the building and the project and you give it to the sort of asset managers, building managers, that they do hold that information carefully. They understand that they're there to maintain it as well, because that's the one thing we don't do very well. So I just wrote a piece talking, if you go on a CRM, like, I want to compare CRM tools, you'll instantly see how they, say they can integrate with Outlook and Microsoft and Google and, whatever it is. And I just think we need to work a bit on that to try and show how some of this data that we're collecting and passport information can be seamlessly transitioned between different platforms and things to try and make it easy for a client and, ultimately be able to hold and maintain that data for a longer period. So that's what I don't think will happen this year, but I would like to see it happen.
But it should happen.
A way off.
Interesting.
But yeah, that's kind of like one message that I'm taking.
I think with all, as you said, with all of the tools that are already being developed and out there, I wonder how much of that's going to be disturbed by the AI movement. As you said, if the data is out there in terms of the members and the materials and what's available, coupled that with powerful AI, and it might be that EME are already doing that in terms of finding, sourcing, matching, and maybe proactively recommending to developers, to clients that, we know it's about that. We know what you're doing. And by the way, we've got this to help that supply and demand mechanism. But look, really interesting. I think that's a great place to stop today. Thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed it. And we'll get you back on in a year's time.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. This podcast is sponsored by Fidgins, a London-based cost consultancy. Please visit fidgins.co.uk to find out more about our market-leading service and some of the amazing clients we get to work with. We're super open to guest recommendations for this podcast, so if there's anyone in the industry you'd like to get on the show, please visit the website or send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll try to make it happen. Thanks and bye for now.